Treasurer, thank you very much for your time. Now, this tax debate's been running a while. What are you actually hoping to achieve in your talks tomorrow? Will you be seeking to narrow down the options for tax reform?
Tomorrow we'll be talking principally about state and territory taxes under that topic. I'm sure other state and territory treasurers may wish to raise other matters, and that's fine. At our last meeting we agreed that it was important we'd had a good look at the issues around Commonwealth taxes, and some of that information is being presented to the leaders, which has found its way out into the public space, which is fine. I mean, that's what will be put to the leaders tomorrow. We saw all that back in October. But tomorrow we're going to be focusing on the issues and options around state and territory taxes and charges, which is some $85 billion a year, and that's one part of it. The other part of it, I think, is this, David. This has been, I think, a very good discussion we've had with the states and territories, but I think we're really getting to the point now of being able to clarify what the objectives are, and those objectives in this debate may not be reconcilable. I mean, from the Commonwealth's point of view, we're not really interested at all in raising taxes to support high levels of spending. We're interested in changing the tax system to make it growth friendly, and that means handing back any changes to the tax system in tax cuts, whether it's in personal income tax or company tax or things of that nature. But if the state's agenda is simply to have a raise in taxes to pay for higher spending, well, we may have irreconcilable objectives there.
Isn't that one of the inherent problems, though, with the GST option? A GST would require compensation, as you and the Prime Minister have acknowledged. That inevitably means higher taxes and higher spending.
Well, no, there's compensation is one issue, and compensation is largely automatic because it just follows the indexation around the various payments, and then you've got personal income tax to do that. What I'm referring to is if the objective of the states and territories is to ask the Commonwealth to increase the GST to create a large pool of revenue for them to spend on their services and their obligations and commitments, well, you know, it's not a magic pudding. You can't achieve all of these objectives. The government's objective, as it was
but when you say it just follows indexation,
was to get a tax mix switch.
Sorry, but just talk me through what you do for pensioners. I mean, if you put up the GST, you are going to have to increase some form of compensating pensioners.
Well, of course, and the compensation is actually automatic because the indexation actually ensures that should prices rise, and there would be a price impact surely, but that would be immediately compensated for through the normal compensation mechanisms. And that's what occurred last time.
So nothing on top of that?
The issue of there being... The issue of appropriate compensation was demonstrated as being effective last time this was done, and so that's the lived experience. The argument that those adjustments can't be made is not borne out by experience. That's not the issue. The issue here is whether tens of billions of dollars each year should be made available through an increase in the GST to simply give to the states for them to support their recurrent expenditure. Now, that's not tax reform. That's just spending with higher taxes. And what we're interested in a discussion with the states is how do you make the tax system work better to grow the economy? Now, you grow the economy, the states benefit as well. The states benefit through their other revenue sources by growing the economy and growing jobs. That's the only reason for the Prime Minister and I and the government to be involved in this discussion. Now, it may well be, David, that tomorrow that those objectives are very different, and if that's the case, then it wouldn't actually enable us, I think, to get to a united position on those questions.
Sure, but I'm interested in what you're saying here, that if you went down this path, and I know this is just one of the number of options on the table, but there wouldn't be any additional payments for families or pensioners to compensate for an increased GST. It would simply be through the existing payments going up thanks to inflation going up.
Well, that's how compensation works. That's how it worked last time. And if there is a need to provide additional adjustment payments around some of these areas, then of course you would do that as well if that was the option you're pursuing. But let's go back to
but
where
isn't
this
that
all
the higher
started.
spending that you're saying you're not interested in?
This year. Pardon? Say that again?
Isn't that the higher spending, though, that you're saying you're not interested in?
No, that is just simply an adjustment mechanism if you went down that path. The higher spending I'm talking about is when the states first came to the Commonwealth some months ago, earlier this year, they asked the Commonwealth to model and assist them in understanding how various options on the GST would deliver what sorts of revenue. Now, we responded to that. We provided them with that information in October. I presented that information along with Treasury. That is also now being provided to the leaders. Now, the states, if their position is this, which says we want the GST to go up so we can have higher levels of revenue to spend on our services, well, that's a tax and spend approach. And that's not tax reform, that's just spending. What we're interested in, if we're to engage in these discussions, is changing the tax system to support growth. And that means getting the shackles off personal income tax, getting the shackles off company tax, things that are holding our economy back. That means handing back this revenue in the form of bigger tax cuts for families and individuals and people who are working, saving and investing.
All right, let me ask you, the Prime Minister did say only a month ago, when it comes to tax reform, we are committed to ensuring that it is fair and that households on lower incomes are not worse off as a result. That is absolutely critical. Is that still the commitment, that those households on lower incomes will not be worse off?
Well, of course. Why would we be contemplating something different to that? And who's suggesting we would be? You'd have to ask them, on what basis would you say that? Any time we've considered these issues, and certainly when the coalition governments have implemented them in the past, that's exactly what we've done. So the issue of making adjustments if you're to change the tax system to ensure people who are vulnerable are not adversely affected, I mean, that is the lived experience. That's what is done. Now, that doesn't in any way remove the opportunity to have significant changes in the tax system of cutting people's personal income tax or even cutting company tax rates if you go down this path. But those decisions haven't been taken yet. Where we are at the moment with the states and territories, I think, is we have some competing objectives. We want a growth-friendly tax system. We don't want a spending-friendly tax system. And we need to ensure that we're on the same page in terms of the objective. But if we're not, well, that's been a useful discussion. There's plenty of other things for us to talk about with the states and territories. We're going ahead with the Harper reforms and the productivity payment process. We're going ahead with some discussions tomorrow on how we can better ensure foreign investment decisions around strategic infrastructure assets at the state level come under FIRB review. Sure, those sorts of things, and I think they're all very positive areas for discussion.
You want to land some tax reform. We know that. I mean, can I ask you, how important is a unified position from the states and territories? Do you really need all of them on board for whatever you want to do?
Well, at present, I mean, not all the states and territories are of that view now. And that's based on a proposition from the states and territories that increasing the GST would mean just revenue going back to the states for them to spend. I mean, the Victorian Treasurer has said that he's opposed to that, and he just wants to increase the Medicare levy. Now, I think what that demonstrates is there are some states who simply just want to raise taxes to get more money. Now, we're not a tax and spend government. If states and territories, if that's their view, well, they've got taxes, they can raise their own taxes if that's what they want to do, to spend more money, and they can have that discussion with their own electors.
But what I'm asking is, are you prepared as a federal government to take on tax reform even if the states and territories aren't all behind you?
Well, I'm interested in a growth-friendly tax system. If the states and territories want to assist with that, then great. But that we will continue, I believe, to keep the options on the table from a federal point of view. And the purpose of doing that, David, is very single-minded. And that is, we want to give personal income tax cuts. We want to be able to reduce the burden of corporate tax if we're able to do that with such changes. Now, how far we're able to achieve that and what can be done, well, that's the purpose of the white paper process we've been engaged with for some time. And we're not creating, I think, any false expectations around that. We'll work through that process over the summer again. If the states want to be part of that, great, but I think there is a bit of a divergence of the objectives here. Just because a state may want to increase the GST, that doesn't mean they're interested in tax reform. That just may mean that they want more money to spend on the things they're spending it on.
Peter Costello has issued a warning against the government going down the path of increasing the GST. I know you see him as something of a mentor. Have you spoken to him specifically about this?
Sure. Oh, look, I talk to Peter very regularly about these things, and Peter's absolutely right. Tax reform is not easy. It wasn't easy for him and John Howard, but I tell you what it did. It supported growth, it supported jobs, it set up a decade of very strong government from the Howard Costello government. And tough decisions, you know what, they're tough. There's no surprise about that. And I think, Peter is right to point out that this is not something you embark on lightly. And I think what that means is you've got to be very clear about what your purpose is. Our purpose in engaging this debate is not to balance the budget. The budget will come into balance over the cycle by controlling expenditure. This is not a substitute for controlling expenditure. That is our focus when it comes to the budget. Then we must grow the economy, because that's what builds revenues and that's what creates jobs. So we are a government that believes that we have an expenditure problem. That is the principal fiscal problem this country faces, and that's what we're addressing. We've also got to drive growth. And you drive growth by having a growth-friendly tax system, and that means you address the issues that we're currently addressing in that area.
Let me change tack, Scott Morrison. Do you think there is a problem within Islam that requires reformation?
Well, I was once advised by a former leader, we know him well, Tony, that politicians are not political theologians. And I don't pretend to be one now, and offer commentary on that. I've been around this issue for so many years, and I've been quite practically engaged in the local Islamic community here in my home city of Sydney for many years, and have many good friends there. And look, there's many productive and progressive discussions happening within the Islamic community itself about these questions, and that's about the indigenising of Islam, not Muslims. I mean, Muslims are people, and they are Australian, but how the Islamic religion plays out here in Australia, and how it's organised, and how that evolves over time and becomes more driven by Australian cultural practice rather than overseas cultural practice. Well, they're all positive things, but I should stress that the Islamic community here in Australia, and particularly here in my home city, are already having those discussions. And they're positive, progressive discussions. But in all of these things, we've got to be very careful that we don't do the bidding of those who would seek to divide Australians of different faiths and to disrespect people of different faiths. I have my own faith. Others have theirs. Freedom of religion is a positive thing in this country. And we need to ensure that we focus on the values that unite us all, regardless of our faith, and that our values are the things that are prized most in that process.
So politicians should stay out of such religious debates?
Well, it's for the religions to make those their own decisions, whether it's mine or yours or whoever's. And they will make their own judgments about these things. And it is important that for any religion in this country, if it seeks to be engaging and part of the community, then obviously it needs to continue to evolve and be part of the community as so many religions are. So I'm not going to get into a set of recommendations about how some other religious community conducts itself and its own practices. But what I will say is this, is every Australian must uphold Australian values. Every Australian community organisation must be committed to Australian values. And I think that's something that's shared by Muslims and non-Muslims alike.
Just a final one quickly. There are plans for a rally on Friday to mark the 10th anniversary of the Cronulla riots. It's in your electorate, of course. Jamal Rifi, I know, is seeking an injunction to stop this rally. What are your views on it? Well, I think the blow-in should stay away. I mean, in the Shire, and I'm down in the Shire today, eagerly awaiting the arrival of the Minister for Innovation, Industry and Science, Christopher Pyne. Very excited about the innovation statement that he's released this week, and he's visiting the Shire this evening. But in this community, we're a cohesive community, we're a hard-working community. That'll be a day like any others. What happened all those years ago and the revenge attacks that followed in other parts of Sydney were appalling. They were disgraceful. There are some people who live a long way from the Shire who want to come and use our community for this reason, and they're frankly, they can go and do it somewhere else if they want to. We'll just have a good day down at the beach and enjoy the wonderful lifestyle we enjoy down here every day. And we're just getting on with life down here and celebrating the great Australian opportunities that we have in this wonderful part of Sydney. Sounds pretty good. Treasurer Scott Morrison, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome to join us, David. Come and join us anytime.
One day, all right. Thank you very much for that.